The Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations will come to order. The subcommittee is meeting today to hear testimony on police cameras at the Department of Interior, inconsistencies, failures, and consequences. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at the hearing are limited to the chair and the ranking minority member or their designees. This will help us and allow us to hear from our witness sooner and help members keep their schedules. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of their hearing record if they're submitted to the clerk by 5 p.m. today, or the close of hearing, whichever comes first. Hearing no objections, so ordered. I ask unanimous consent that Representatives Jennifer Wexton, Dawn Byer, Eleanor Holmes-Norton, and Deb Holland join the hearing to ask questions of the witnesses. Hearing no objection there, so ordered. Without objection, the chair may also declare a recess subject to the call of the chair. As described in the notice, statements, documents, or motions must be submitted to the electronic repository at capital HNRC small DOCS at mail.house.gov. Additionally, please note that as with in-person meetings, members are responsible for their own microphones. Members can be muted by staff only to avoid inadvertent background noise. Finally, members or witnesses experiencing technical problems should inform committee staff immediately. On November 17, 2017, Bijan Gazar, In 2018, the Interior's Office of the Inspector General issued a scathing report about the policies that govern the use of body-worn cameras throughout the DOI. In response, DOI issued a new draft interim body-worn camera policy. The Leadership Conference for Civil and Human Rights and dozens of other organizations came together in 2015 to release basic civil rights principles for body-worn camera usage. They turned those consensus principles into 8 criteria from which to evaluate body camera policies. We measured Interior's draft interim policy against the Leadership Conference's criteria. Interior's draft interim policy only fully met one of the 8 criteria. That's an 88% failure rate. 88%. The deficiencies are significant. The policy isn't publicly available. It doesn't limit biometric technologies like facial recognition. It doesn't prevent the officer from seeing footage before writing a report about an incident. In fact, on many of the important questions like those, the Interior policy says that Bureau should decide. That creates an inconsistent set of basic civil protections that will change depending on which Bureau's law enforcement officer you run into. Since DOI defers to the bureaus, this is the part where I would tell you how the bureau policies stack up against the Leadership Conference's criteria. But of the 5 major bureau law enforcement units, Interior would only give us the policies for 2. And one of those had significant redactions. While Interior fully met only one of the 8 criteria for basic protections of civil rights, the Park Service Rangers policy fully met 2 of the benchmarks. Fish and Wildlife fully met 4. Interior has briefed the committee on the topic twice over 2 years, but has still not been able to tell us how much the body-worn camera programs cost so that Congress can fund them. They told us in 2018 that Interior was overseeing a pilot project on body-worn cameras in DOI agencies, though they wouldn't tell us how long it would last, who was involved, or how much it cost. When we met with them 2 years later and asked for an update on the pilot program, they said they had no idea what we were talking about. And of course, when we invited them to this hearing today, repeatedly, they refused to answer questions like these. They refused to even attend. A culture of entitlement and secrecy has infected way too many police forces across the U.S. It appears to have affected at least the Park Police as well. Video footage is not the panacea that will bring a culture of fairness, accountability, and transparency, but it is a first step. This level of resistance of taking this first step only raises more questions about what they have to hide. As Bijan has reminded us, their resistance has consequences. And now we'll recognize Ranking Member Gonzalez Colon for her opening statement.
I begin my statement, Ms. Gazer. I would like to extend my deepest sympathies for the loss of your son. And I think we're here today to discuss the use of body-worn cameras by law enforcement officers of the Department of Interior. And this is an important topic and one that deserves a robust discussion. I want to thank all the witnesses for joining us today. I look forward for your thoughts on this and other factors that should be considered prior to enacting such a requirement. Body-worn cameras have the potential to be a useful tool. As several witnesses noted, they provide benefits for both law enforcement officers and the public. While these benefits are indicators of the positive impact these tools will have, Mr. Go, I think you're right in your testimony when you said, and I quote, the devil is on the details. The nature of and scope of these policies that govern these cameras is critical to this program's success. And while there is an initial positive reaction to the idea of implementing body-worn cameras, we have a responsibility to discuss the policies to carry out these programs, the cost to purchase and maintain them, and the infrastructure and technological needs and the impact in the personnel as well. In January of 2018, the Office of Inspector General released a report that concluded that draft body-worn camera policy did not meet the industry standards and that the Inspector General believed should be mandatory. The Fish and Wildlife Service's body-worn camera policy released in May of 2019 seems to address many of the concerns noted in this report, including an implementation of standard operating procedures for the storage of data and for the retention of records. As the Interior Department continues to evaluate its policies, I hope the industry standards and the perspective of law enforcement officers are taken into consideration as well. Only after policies have been established that comply with industry standards and address concerns about privacy for both officers and the public should the department begin the process of implementing a body-worn camera program. After these plans have been solidified, the next step is to lay the foundation of it. For body-worn cameras, the program's foundation is rooted in the financial support the program will receive. When analyzing the financial capacity required, we must look beyond the initial cost of purchasing the camera, the maintenance cost, expenses to store the data, and the additional personal costs that could come up with complying with requests to produce footage all add up. These concerns were highlighted in Mr. Northup's testimony when he noted that some parks may not have implemented body cameras programs because they do not have the support within their current budgets. Without the ability to financially support these tools and the additional costs associated with them, we are setting these programs to fail. It takes resources to ensure that our law enforcement officers can keep us safe and for them to stay safe in the process of doing their jobs. With expenses associated with implementation of body-worn cameras, I have to point out the contradictory argument by some of our colleagues who want to institute this program while calling to defund the police. That is certainly not a foundation that I will be comfortable building on. The framework can be erected after we are confident in the foundation. Once we can be sure that there's a financial backing for a body-worn camera program, we have to ensure that the program is supported by necessary elements, and this includes training on how to operate the cameras and comply with policies, as well as availability of technology and infrastructure to store footage. Only with a firm foundation and appropriate support will the implementation of body-worn camera requirement is going to be successful. Many law enforcement officers view body cameras as useful. In fact, Mr. Cosme testimony stated evidence has shown that body-worn cameras can be an effective tool and beneficial at protecting both law enforcement officers and individuals when they interact with. However, their effectiveness will be severely limited if the policies guiding their use, financial requirements, and support needs are not adequately discussed. That's why an honest discussion today is so important. We have the opportunity to evaluate these benefits and limitations of the program. And if implemented mindfully, body-worn cameras have the potential to benefit the community and our law enforcement officers. We owe it to the public and to the brave men and women who serve our communities to have a thoughtful discussions around the realities surrounding the requirement of federal law enforcement officers at the Department of Interior to wear these body cameras. With that, I yield back to the chairman.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Gonzalez Colon. Now we will move to witness introductions. And to introduce our first witness, I will yield to the gentlelady from Virginia, Representative Wexton, to introduce her constituent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to wave onto this committee and to introduce our first witness, Mrs. Kelly Gaysar, who's a constituent of mine. She lives just outside of Washington, D.C. in McLean, Virginia, with her husband, James. She is the mother of two beautiful children, Nagin, her daughter, and Bijan, her son. Unfortunately, she's joining us today because she is part of a growing group of Americans that she never wanted to be a part of. And that is a mother whose unarmed son was killed by law enforcement. In her case, her son Bijan was shot and killed by United States Park Police 1,047 days ago. That's almost 3 years. And since that time, their family has received no justice, no transparency, and no accountability in his death. Honor of representing her in Congress and fighting alongside her for justice for Bijan. Thank you, Mrs. Gaysar, for joining us today.
Thank the gentlelady. Our next witnesses will be Mr. Arthur Ego, who's the director of Criminal Justice Project for the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. Before that, he was a public defender in Washington, D.C. for 19 years. Mr. Larry Cosme is the national president of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association. He is a retired special agent with Homeland Security Investigations, a division of Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Mr. Jim Northrup is an executive council member of the Coalition to Protect America's National Parks. He served for over 36 years in the National Park Service, including 24 years as a law enforcement ranger. Jim retired in 2017 as the superintendent of the Shenandoah National Park and was also chief ranger, among many other positions. Let me remind the witnesses that under committee rules, they must limit their oral statements to 5 minutes, but that their entire statement will appear in the hearing record. Before you begin, the timer will begin and will turn orange when you have 1 minute remaining. I remind the members and witnesses joining remotely, use the grid view so that you may pin the timer on the screen. After your testimony is complete, please remember to mute yourself to avoid any inadvertent background noise. And I'll also allow the entire panel to testify before questioning the witnesses. The chair now recognizes Ms. Kelly Gaysar to testify.
Thank you, Representative Wexton, for your kind introduction and support. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Kelly Gaysar. I'm Bijan Gaysar's mom. On September 4th, we celebrated Bijan's 28th birthday without his physical presence for the 3rd year. Bijan was born in Fairfax Hospital, the same hospital he died 25 years later. As a toddler, Bijan was the cutest boy imaginable. He loved his microcars and Legos. I will never forget the joy in his eyes when we got his first PlayStation console when he was in fourth grade. The summer before his freshman year, he trained for and made it to Langley's freshman football team. He did not have a football player's physique and was not born an athlete, but he loved the game and worked hard. He fell in love with the New England Patriots when they won the Super Bowl after 9/11. Bijan earned a degree in accounting from Virginia Commonwealth University and joined his father's accounting firm in McLean, Virginia. Everything changed on November 17, 2017, when two men in plain clothing knocked on our door, two detectives from the Park Police. They told us Bijan was in a shootout. I did not believe them. Bijan was anti-gun, anti-violence, and would not be involved in a shootout. They said they would meet us in the hospital. We never saw them again. When we got to the hospital, the doctor told us Bijan was shot in the head multiple times. He would not survive. We then learned we could not visit our son, and his body was guarded by the Park police officers. After pleading with the doctors and their advocacy, the Park police let us visit with our Bijan under the conditions that we could not approach his body, we could not touch him, and there would be a Park police officer present, and there would be a Park police officer present in the room to guard us. We learned that Bijan was shot by the Park police early the next day when we watched the coverage on the news and saw Bijan's car in a ditch on TV. The federal government has never explained to my family and the public why Alejandro Amaya and Lucas Vineyard of Park Police murdered our son. The Park Police has not even started an internal investigation into Bijan's shooting. These officers were on paid leave for 6 months and have been back at work for years. The Park Police do not wear body cameras and their cruisers do not have dash cameras. If not for Fairfax County Cruisers' dash cameras, we would have never known how our son was murdered. We would have never had seen the Park Police violate their own policies. My family, Bijan's friends, and our community and the world would not have known the truth that these officers shot Bijan 10 times while he sat unarmed in his car. I would like to thank Fairfax County Police Chief Ed Rossler for releasing the tape. If not for his courage, these officers would have gotten away with their made-up false version of the event. I would also like to thank Congressman Wexton and Eleanor Holmes Norton, Congressman Beyer, Senators Warner, Kane, Grassley, and State Senator Sowell for their kindness and support they have shown my family and pushing the Park Police for answers. About a month ago, U.S. Park Police Chief Gregory Moynihan testified that his agency would not participate in body camera pilot. Why would they, when they can literally get away with murder without them? My son Bijan was a handsome, charming, caring, inclusive, funny, and most of all, kind-hearted and loyal young man. Everywhere he went, he was loved. I still remember the sounds of Bijan. Bij is here, Bijan. I am proud to have had him for 25 years. Bijan was my best friend and teacher. Every time he would hear me complain or not at my best, he would say, "Mommy, you're better than that." It was humbling, and I loved him for that. Even now, I use my words and choose my actions, wanting to make him proud. I pray to Bijan every day to help me a better person and not sink into anger and despair. Bijan deserves justice and transparency. Body cameras do one important job. One job. They give us the truth, not an version of alternative truth. We are your eyes, we are your voice, we are your heart. We are Bijan. I am forever Bijan. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair will now recognize Mr. Arthur Ago to testify.
Good afternoon, Chairman Cox, Ranking Member Gonzalez Colon, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Arthur Ago, and I serve as the director of the Criminal Justice Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under law. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the use of body-worn and dashboard cameras by the police. The Lawyers Committee has been a leader in the battle for equal rights since it was created in 1963 at the request of President Kennedy to enlist the private legal bar's leadership and resources in combating discrimination. Our Criminal Justice Project confronts the ways in which racism infects our criminal justice system, challenges laws and policies that criminalize poverty, promotes access to justice, and advances accountability and transparency within police departments. In the wake of the killings of George Floyd, Bijan Gaysar, Breonna Taylor, and far too many other people of color, tens of millions of Americans took to the streets to rise up against police abuse, violence, and misconduct. To put it simply, we need transformative change to America's flawed systems of police accountability and transparency. Unlike a number of our state and local law enforcement departments, the Department of the Interior's law enforcement agencies have failed to implement many of the most basic reforms that increase accountability and transparency. One first step to transformative change is straightforward. Require that the department's law enforcement agencies deploy body-worn and dashboard cameras and do so under a strict set of rules and policies around their use. With few other federal law enforcement agencies requiring officers to record what they do while on duty, the department also has the chance to lead the way across the federal government and to set an example for other federal agencies to follow. As you have heard from Mrs. Gaysar, one of those agencies, the U.S. Park Police, is a case study in secrecy and impunity. Mrs. Gaysar and her family should not have had to file a federal lawsuit to get the names of the two Park Police officers who killed her son. And were it not for the presence of the Fairfax County, Virginia Police, neither Mr. Gaysar's family, nor the public, nor this subcommittee would have had any recording of what those two officers did 3 years ago. The Park Police's reluctance to deploy cameras and subsequent fight against releasing even the most basic information to the Gaysars underscores the department's resistance to accountability and transparency. Change is needed, and it is needed urgently. As I stated in my written testimony, the Park Police is not an isolated example. The tragedies that have occurred at the hands of several law enforcement officers under the department also underscore the need for policies governing the use of cameras and recordings. The research is clear. If officers are not given clear orders on what they must record, and if officers are not disciplined when they fail to follow those orders, police cameras fail in safeguarding accountability and transparency. In fact, one study shows that the use of force actually increased when officers were given discretion on what and when to record. But common sense principles will protect the integrity of the process. There must be a set of clear policies and rules that the public can review. There must be strict limits on officer discretion on when to record. There must be timely disclosure of camera footage when there are allegations of misconduct. These are only a few examples of policies on which there is widespread consensus, and there is no shortage of examples of successful state and local programs to which this subcommittee can look. The department's law enforcement agencies should not be a stain on the proud history and tradition of the Department of the Interior. These law enforcement agencies should not be lagging behind basic state and local police reforms. This is a common sense reform. Law enforcement officers and the public alike support officers wearing body-worn cameras. Nothing will bring back Bijan Gaysar or take away the pain that his family continues to suffer. But requiring body-worn and dashboard cameras, along with robust policies governing their use, will be a first step toward bringing these agencies out of the past and making them more accountable and transparent to the communities they are sworn to serve and to protect. I urge the subcommittee and Congress to take this forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ago. The chair will now recognize Mr. Larry Cosme for his testimony.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman Cox and Ranking Member Gonzalez Colon and members of the subcommittee. My name is Larry Cosme. I am the National President of the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, commonly referred to as FLAOA. FLAOA is the largest non-for-profit, nonpartisan professional association representing the interests of the federal law enforcement officers in the United States. FLAOA has more than 29,000 members across 65 federal agencies, including those of the Department of Interior, that are tasked with the important mission of protecting the national treasures and the millions of people that use them. For more than 27 years, I served as a federal law enforcement officer as a special agent within the Department of Homeland Security, a division of U.S. Customs and Immigration Enforcement at the Department of Homeland Security. Over the course of my career, I held true to the oath of faithfully protecting and serving the American people as required by the Constitution of the United States and the laws passed by Congress. As a federal law enforcement officer, my responsibilities and obligations were identical to those of the brave men and women that comprise the law enforcement components of the Department of Interior. By any estimate, the Department of Interior's law enforcement officers are tasked with an enormous mission that includes sites and locations at some of the most valuable natural and man-made resources and treasures. Unfortunately, while they are viewed as treasures by most people, they are also targets of terrorists, international criminals, anarchists, arsonists, thieves, vandals, and others with goals that are focused on nefarious conduct and crime. I offer this on background because our nation's heritage is tied to those national treasures, and it should be our nation's priority and goal to protect them and ensure that we use them as they're also protected. Unfortunately, over the past few months, DOI properties have not been spared of national conversation on justice and fairness. In Washington, D.C. in particular, we have seen large-scale protests and riots that occur in DOI-controlled property. It has also experienced a heavy toll on the actions of these anarchists, rioters, and violent agitators with destruction and devastation. We have seen memorials, buildings, parks, all occurring while the law enforcement officers in the Department of Interior had been tasked with managing and responding to the destruction, which is in part the reason for this hearing today. In the vacuum of factual evidence of incidents, inflammatory 5-second videos, inaccurate news reports, and false social media posts have been used over the past 4 months to taint law enforcement efforts of federal law enforcement officers across America, including the Department of Interior. While those contextually absent commentaries begin to dominate reporting on these incidents, they truly do not capture the officer's experience. It can easy to scrutinize officers based on viral videos taken by outsiders. But in the moment of action, an officer must rely directly on what's in front of them in a split-second decision based on training that maximize immediate public safety. Outside videos and social media snippets are exactly as described in the outsider's perspective, and other officers' actions are based on the officer's perspective, which brings to this hearing's focal question of body-worn cameras as a federal law enforcement tool for law enforcement officers in the Department of Interior. As a general rule, some of this body-worn camera can be used as an effective tool and beneficial to protecting law enforcement officers and those individuals they interact with. And obviously, it has evidentiary value. But one thing I do want to highlight in my testimony, and it's submitted for the record, is the communication issues that the Department of Interior has and its inadequate funding of the communication system that should go hand in hand with body-worn cameras. It's important to have body-worn cameras, and we as an association see it as a beneficial tool. But we also have to understand the financial impact on these agencies that will be enormous in maintaining these body-worn cameras, and also the ability for these body-worn cameras, the purchase of the hardware, the reviewing, and the implementation of the policies that need to be consistent across the board with these body-worn cameras and maintaining these, just like when they maintain vehicles that government law enforcement officers use every day when they're patrolling their areas of responsibilities. And also the training and the potential pilot programs must first be funded and implemented prior to any component or department rolling out a service-wide body-worn camera policy. The disclosure of body-worn cameras records must also be addressed, and control for the disclosure and also the privacy of the individuals that are encountered during the course of the law enforcement officers' work. I want to thank the committee for giving me the opportunity to testify today. and I am proud to represent the federal law enforcement officers of the United States. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cosme. The chair will now recognize Mr. Jim Northrup for his testimony.
Chairman Cox and Ranking Member Gonzalez Colon and members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is Jim Northup. I serve on the Executive Council of the Coalition to Protect America's National Parks. The Coalition is a nonprofit organization composed of more than 1,800 retired, former, and current employees of the National Park Service who collectively have nearly 40,000 years of experience in managing and protecting national parks and national park visitors. I personally worked for the National Park Service for over 36 years, 24 of those years as a law enforcement commissioned ranger. I worked as a field ranger, supervised law enforcement commissioned rangers at Grand Teton and Grand Canyon National Parks, and served as the chief ranger at Big Bend and Great Smoky Mountains National Parks. For the last 12 years of my career, I served as a park superintendent, providing oversight to the resource and visitor protection programs, including law enforcement, at Pictured Rocks National Lake Shore and Shenandoah National Park. The Coalition is supportive of the law enforcement function within the Department of the Interior. We believe in rigorous professional standards for law enforcement programs and strongly support the use of both in-car and body camera systems by DOI law enforcement officers and park rangers. The Coalition is also an advocate for periodic evaluation of DOI law enforcement programs against accepted professional standards by third-party accrediting organizations. As was mentioned earlier, within the National Park Service, there are two groups with responsibility for law enforcement functions within our national parks. The U.S. Park Police, who serve primarily in the more urban parks of Washington, D.C., New York, and San Francisco, and U.S. National Park Rangers, who are duty stationed in the other units of the national park system. Both groups function as fully commissioned federal law enforcement officers. I think it would be of interest to the committee to know that in-car video systems have been in use by U.S. National Park Rangers in numerous parks for many years. And more recently, the use of body cameras by National Park Rangers has also become more widespread. The National Park Service has advised me that at last count, body cameras were in use by over 1,000 commissioned rangers in over 100 parks. Though not mandatory, the NPS has been very supportive of the use of both in-car and body camera systems by field rangers. They are strongly supported by both management and field rangers. We do understand that based on a 2015 memorandum, the U.S. Park Police do not use body-worn cameras at this time. I can tell you from my personal experience that while video footage of a law enforcement encounter never tells the entire story of an incident, it does provide critically important information about incidents where almost everyone is under a great deal of stress, there are conflicting perspectives, and memories are known to be faulty. I have personally used this information to review use of force incidents, arrest procedures, and complaints filed against rangers. These systems clearly promote professionalism, protect the public interest, and often protect law enforcement officers. However, we agree with the 2018 Inspector General's report that the DOI's policies on the use of this equipment needs to be more fully developed and be consistent with accepted professional standards. The department's policy on law enforcement, DM 446, has been silent on this issue for too long, resulting in individual bureaus each developing their own policies. We believe the IG's report contains excellent recommendations for how this program should be implemented throughout the department. While we strongly support the use of this equipment, we also believe this cannot be an unfunded mandate from Congress. I can tell you that the parks that do not have an in-car or body cam program likely do not have one because they simply can't support one within current park budgets. If Congress wants to see the DOI use this equipment consistently throughout all the bureaus, Congress must provide the funding necessary to properly manage the program, purchase the equipment, provide the training, maintain the equipment, manage the data by accepted professional standards, and effectively manage the Freedom of Information Act requests and other issues, release issues associated with the gathering of this information. The Coalition to Protect America's National Parks believes that the use of both in-car and body cam systems by Department of Interior law enforcement officers and park rangers is imperative to having a law enforcement program that is totally professional, transparent, accountable to, and trusted by the public. Thank you for the opportunity to comment today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Northrup, and exactly why we're meeting here today. I certainly want to thank the panel for their testimony and reminding members of the committee that Committee Rule 3D imposes a 5-minute limit on questions, and the chair will now recognize members for any questions they may wish to ask the witnesses, and we'll begin with myself. And Ms. Gaysar, in your testimony, you mentioned that the 2 U.S. Park Police came to your door the night Bijan was killed. They told you that Bijan had been in a quote-unquote shootout and that they would meet you at the hospital. Not only was there no shootout, since your son was completely unarmed, but those officers never met you or came to meet you at the hospital. And I think I speak for any reasonable person when I say that the U.S. Park Police officers' treatment towards you that night was important. Can you tell us a bit more about how they treated you after that night? Did they treat you with professionalism that you expect from a federal law enforcement unit? And how did the way that the Park Police treated you compare to the way that Fairfax Police Department treated you?
Thank you for that question. Well, actually, that night when the 2 Park Police detectives came to our house, as you mentioned, they told us John was in a shootout, which was a lie to begin with. They also told us when we asked for more detail that they would go back to the scene and they would meet us at the hospital to explain more. We never, ever saw those 2 detectives again. In fact, we've never met anyone from the Park Police except the day that Chief McLean came to the waiting room to tell us 3 days later he's turning over the case to the FBI. And
Well, thanks so much for that. And did the Park Police ever acknowledge that they killed your son? Is that something that's even in dispute?
well, the Park Police has never acknowledged the fact that their officers, Alejandro Amaya and Lucas Maynard, shot and killed my son. They have never held a meeting, a press conference, anything to let my family or the public know of what happened to Bijan, ever. As far as the treatment of us that night in the hospital, when we got to the hospital, as I said in my opening statement, the doctor told us that Bijan was being guarded and that he was evidence, as they put it. And when we got really sad and started crying and pleading, they let us visit with Bijan for 10 minutes. And as I mentioned, that Bijan would be guarded. As far as treatment, I don't know what more could be crueler than that. So I would say the treatment was inhuman and awful.
Thank you. And Mr. Ago, you're a former public defender. In that capacity, did you have any experience or knowledge of the U.S. Park Police? And can you tell me what would be the perception among your former colleagues of the U.S. Park Police's reputation for fair and just policing?
Thank you for your question, Chairman Cox. I was a public defender for close to 20 years in Washington, D.C., and served as a line defender, a supervisor, and ultimately the chief of the trial division at the Public Defender Service. And unfortunately, the United States Park Police had by far the worst reputation of all of the law enforcement agencies that operated within the nation's capital. They had the reputation of consistently violating constitutional rights of people that they arrested, as well as the reputation of an agency that did not keep misconduct records, did not appear to follow any sort of misconduct guidelines, did not provide any records to the public for review. And that reputation was inferentially confirmed by the United States Attorney's Office, who would frequently dismiss cases involving the United States Park Police.
Well, thanks so much for that. And certainly with a reputation like that, would it be fair to say that focusing on better accountability and transparency at the Park Police would be a good place to start? And certainly would wearing body cameras help with that?
It is an absolutely necessary first step, Chairman Cox, that transparency and accountability begin at the United States Park Police, and body-worn cameras and dashboard cameras are a first step, yes.
Well, thank you so much. And with that, I will yield to my ranking member, Representative Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, before I begin, I need to send my deepest sympathies to Ms. Gazer. That should never happen. And you never expect law enforcement officers to be involved in something like this. So I'm deeply sorry about it. Now I want to do my question to Mr. Cosman. In your testimony, you highlighted the financial impact of the body-worn camera program as one of the issues that need to be discussed today. And I'd like to walk through some of the different costs associated with the implementing the body-worn camera program. I'm not too much related with the issue itself in terms of financially, how much it costs, their maintenance, and how this can be used, although I support it. So let's begin with the initial cost. What is the typical range of cost of purchasing a body-worn camera, Mr. Cosman?
It depends on the technology and the hardware, but typically the range goes from anywhere between $150 to about $1,500 per hardware per officer. So if you're talking 1,000-person department, you're talking about 1,000 pieces of hardware, multiplying it by that amount, depending on the quality of the camera itself. Besides the hardware, you also have the software. That's where it gets tricky. The software needs upgrades typically yearly, and then these companies, these private companies that sell these products have a licensing fee. So the hardware then applies, ultimately for each item that you purchase, you have to buy the licensing and software upgrades to keep up with the technology on this. And also it involves the training of the personnel and the deployment, and also how to download the data and how to, separate it for evidentiary purposes. Because a lot of this obviously is exculpatory during evidentiary hearings and cases, cases that go before the court. So that's a factor in all those costs.
Mr. Cosman, in that same sense, I know that many of the law enforcement officers at the Department of Interior work in different conditions, more outdoor conditions, among others. Is the cost of this equipment different from any other law enforcement if they work in the Department of Interior, or it should be the same?
Actually, it's higher because of the nature of the conditions that they're working in. Like, for example, fish and wildlife officers, they work in inclement conditions in rugged terrain, and therefore, when the equipment becomes defective, you have to get it replaced. So obviously, you also have to factor in the replacement factor for a cost for each individual officer.
And you're saying about the Department of Interior, but should every officer receive their own body camera? What's the benefit of having a specific individually assigning body cameras to officers instead of having a board and changing whose officers is using it daily?
I think it's important for proper maintenance, and also just like any tool that an officer gets issued or agent within the Department of Interior, or a vehicle per se, you take pride in maintaining your equipment as a law enforcement officer, and it's the responsibility of that officer to make sure that they properly maintain it and keep up with it.
Question: once you purchase the camera, and we're talking about the maintenance, what are the costs expected for the storage of all the data that can be captured?
you're talking into the millions, because then you have to utilize a cloud. And then besides the cloud, you also have to have personnel that is wired to segregate specific snippets of the actual video footage that's obtained during doing an encounter.
Okay, if we're talking about millions of dollars in equipment, and actually I support it. I support the complete equipment and the data storage and everything. But how can that happen if you defund the police?
Absolutely not. You know, I'm supportive of it also, like you are. I'm supportive of it, but saying you want to defund the police and defund departments, it's never going to get you anywhere in terms of body-worn cameras. We're not going to have the ability, those departments are not going to have the ability to purchase them.
You said that in your testimony that you were generally supportive of the use of body worn cameras. Is there any situation that you feel that a body worn camera may not be appropriate?
Absolutely. We support, as an association, we support for patrol officers on a daily routine basis. And I think we should have pilot programs both on Capitol Hill for police officers on Capitol Hill, and both for the U.S. Park Police and any other Department of Interior officers that do basic patrols, but not for when they're interviewing witnesses or interviewing confidential informants they're coming forward to report crime.
Thank you. Thank you. My time expired. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Colon. And now we'll recognize the members in order of seniority, and we'll start with Representative Byer from Virginia.
Chairman Cox, thank you very much. And I really want to thank you and Ranking Member Gonzalez Colon for allowing me to be here. And of course, Chairman Grijalva for having this hearing and for staying on top of this issue for the last almost 3 years. And I really want to thank Kelly Gaisar and her husband, James. Thank you, Kelly, for having your courage, your bravery to be here. We are still seeking justice for Bijan. Ms. Gaisar, you mentioned in your testimony how the Park Police has not even started an internal investigation into Bijan's shooting. For years, my office, along with TJ and Jennifer and others, we've asked in person and in written communications for the Department of Interior to engage in a holistic review of this incident. And we've never gotten a satisfactory answer. At first, it was no, the FBI's got an investigation. We have to wait for them. And then after the FBI investigation, we have to hear that we've got to wait until all the legal cases in court are resolved. Ms. Gaisar, it's almost 3 years, another month. Is that justice?
Hello, Representative Byer. How are you? Well, no, this is not justice. Definitely, we have not seen, heard, nor had any justice from Park Police in the past 2.5 years. I can tell you that they are the most secretive, they are the most guarded, they are the most unbelievable police unit ever. And I've made it my life to research about police brutality and police cameras and everything regarding police. The Park Police, for whatever the reason, have kept this under wraps. They even kept their officers' names until almost 1.5 years after Bijan was shot, and we had to get the names from a judge through our civil lawsuit. And that's shameful. Shameful.
Thank you very much. Mr. Northup, Mr. Cosme, thank you both for coming and for speaking very eloquently about the needs in a successful body camera and a dash camera program and its funding. Clearly costs a lot of money. In the months after Bijan's murder, I met with then Chief McLean, who committed to me that the Park Police would adopt body cameras out of then unobligated funds from the department. And we've worked every year since then to ensure they have the funds. I just want to push back the idea that Democrats would defund the police is a Fox News myth. We're not doing that at all. And this summer when I asked, so we worked and we got money in the House Appropriations budget just for this. So when I asked Acting Chief Monahan this summer why the Park Service would not adopt body cameras, just after we passed the bill that addressed funding, his answer was nothing, no answer. So Mr. Ago, you speak about the importance of accountability. It takes over half a year for the Park Service to respond to a simple letter from Congresswoman Norton Wexton to my offices the Park Service itself has backtracked on its own very verbal commitment to me to get body camera program up and running. And the acting police chief can't tell us why it won't adopt body cameras when all legitimate excuses are addressed. Mr. Ago, we're frustrated. How do we build accountability into a department that refuses to take any? And don't we need new leadership? We'll take that more seriously.
Thank you, Congressman Beyer, and thank you for your leadership on the issue of body-worn cameras in the federal government, and in particular in the federal police, along with the leadership of Congresswoman Holmes Norton. Thank you both for that. Absolutely, the park police needs to be more accountable and more transparent. And the benefit of having this subcommittee hearing is so that these issues can be aired out and discussed, and so that the subcommittee can provide guidelines tied to funding to the Department of the Interior to create that, that type of accountability and transparency, starting with, frankly, the leadership of the park police and the troubling history of Acting Chief Monahan. So the answer to your question, yes, is yes, Congressman Beyer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Northup, I have a simple question for you too. I noticed 36 years in the Park Service, 24 as a ranger. I like to brag, I'm the only member of Congress that was a park ranger, only for a year at the Lincoln Memorial, less than a year. So you had all those years as a law enforcement commission ranger. So we have these two structures. Do we need the standalone park police, or shouldn't they be integrated into the Park Service with the rangers?
Well, there are distinctive roles for the U.S. Park Police and U.S. National Park Rangers. As I mentioned in my testimony, the U.S. Park Police are duty stationed primarily in urban parks in Washington, D.C., San Francisco, and New York. And they are focused almost exclusively, not exclusively, but almost exclusively on performing law enforcement. National Park Rangers, on the other hand, have taken great pride in for many years in being what I call a multi-skilled specialists. They perform law enforcement. They are fully trained and equipped and commissioned as law enforcement officers, but they also perform emergency medical services, search and rescue, wildland firefighting, and perform a number of other public safety duties. So the job descriptions are a little different, in large part because of the environments in which the park police and the park rangers work.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Beyer and Mr. Northup. The chair is now going to recognize again Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Questions do I have my mute button? Yes. I was asking Mr. Cosme a few minutes ago about the body cameras and that can be used. Should be there any limit of the use of these cameras? And you were identifying when you were having an interview with a potential witness or doing investigations. Can you provide a committee, maybe not now because of the limitations of time, but a list of limitations that your association is recommending not to use these body cameras?
Well, when you have victims of crime, when you're also trying to, you potentially have a victim of a crime that could potentially become a confidential informant, or even individuals that are associated with the crime itself, that could be multiple conspirators, that you're trying to elicit information. It's difficult if you have body-worn cameras and you're trying to deal with that situation and make it capable where those individuals can cooperate with the law enforcement officer.
Just to have clear, how will be wearing a body camera may impact an officer's day-to-day operations? What other, not just cost, the training that should be expected to be provided in conjunction with the use of the cameras? Can you explain the difference between them, the day-to-day and the training that need to be taken?
Sure. The deployment of the cameras involves initial training, ongoing training, because the technology changes, it's ever evolving. Just like when you buy a computer, it's the same thing. You're downloading software. Those individuals that are responsible for the software are maintaining these hardwares. It's expensive. You're talking about a very expensive product. We're in favor of it. We believe it's beneficial to the officer, and most of the time it exonerates officers when there's false allegations made against officers. I'm not saying, and I don't want to talk about the current matters before the committee, but in most cases it does help and it's beneficial, and it's a reoccurring cost for maintaining the training, outfitting new officers with new cameras as the technology betters with time.
Question that I do have, in order to manage data that you're going to be having for that footage, it's likely that the Department of Interior may have to hire additional people to manage maintenance or the data of their footage?
Absolutely. You would have to have IT professionals that are experts in this area to help the officers that are downloading this data. You're talking thousands of officers in any particular department overall, and it takes a lot of time. It'll take the officers away from, like, typically officers download their data at the end of their shift. So what happens is that time frame is time that the officers are not out in the field basically doing their job in their areas of responsibility. So you do have to hire professionals that manage this stuff, but then, there's discovery issues, there's FOIA issues that also quantify the amount of money that you have to spend in order to maintain it.
And that includes that person should be the one compliant with the responsibility of the Freedom of Information Act request.
That is correct. It's expanded cost because of the Freedom of Information Act request, whether it's for a specific case or a number of cases, or someone just FOIAs like a specific period of time during where the data was captured. You have to hire a lot of people for that to maintain that.
Question, and you should be having experience because so many federal agencies already got this infrastructure. And I want you to walk me through the infrastructure requirements that are necessary to support a successfully body-worn camera. In other words, what kind of technology does the department need to have access to? Is different from department to department?
That is correct. It is different depending on the department and its subcomponents, and depending on the terrain that they're working in. Like in the Department of Interior, like I talked about earlier, you have fish and wildlife officers that are in different terrain. They're in a more rural terrain, or you have like U.S. Park Police officers, like Commissioner Northrop talked about. They're in the bigger cities and more metropolitan settings. It's a little bit different. The type of hardware utilized in those instances are a little bit different. And then also the recurring training, and also the cloud, and also what's going to be released in terms of FOIA. You have to factor all that in terms of to the total amount of money that's used to maintain this.
In your testimony, that you're raising an issue of who is permitted to review, edit, and disclose the recordings captured on body-worn cameras. So in your opinion, which officer should have access to footage and once it has been downloaded and stored?
I think that the officer that actually has the body-worn camera should have the ability to review the footage, and what they should do is make a copy of the original footage, store that in the cloud, and then have those officers that have the original footage have the ability to look at it. Like someone referred to in their testimony earlier, what you see in footage is totally different from what you may be writing in an incident report. But also, ultimately, their supervisors are responsible for the original footage, and that's the key, to safeguard that original footage and segregate that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cosme and Representative Gonzalez-Colon. The chair is now going to recognize our colleague from the district, Representative Holmes Gordon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can.
I want to thank you for holding this very important hearing and allowing me to ask questions, because, of course, I am not a member of the committee or the subcommittee, but it was very important for me to be here. I want to thank Chairman Gavalva for his attention to this important issue all along. My questions are really for Ms. Gazar. We have worked closely with this family, which has courageously held together to make sure that justice is done for Bejar. At press conferences, they have made sure that this matter was resolved. Congresswoman Byer and I have worked closely together after the tragic death, and we were pleased that we were able to get dashboard and body cameras in the now pending, in fact, it's passed, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and we have every reason to believe that notion of body cameras and dashboard cameras will in fact be passed at some point because it has bipartisan support. Ms. Gazar, in light of the work being done on federal dashboard camera area, can you speak to the importance it has been to you, the importance it would be to you to have that legislation passed for these dashboard cameras, body cameras, in light of what your family is going through?
Thank you very much for that question. It's very important because had we not had the footage from the dash camera of Fairfax County police officers, cruisers, we would not have had the truth. Because even maintaining that video, watching that video, seeing it with our own eyes, the events that the Park police officers have described does not show what our eyes see. That is how important the dash cameras are, body cameras are. There is no amount of money that can explain why they cannot be implemented. I'm sure as federal officers, they have enough in the budget to cover for a simple body camera. A person's life and transparency is worth a lot more than we've been told in the last half an hour. I mean,
Yes, indeed. I was surprised to hear so much discussion of cost at this hearing. Cost of what? Cost of a life?
exactly. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I am appalled at the excuses that I hear that the Fairfax County and other police units are able to afford body cameras and dash cameras, and our federal officers, park police officers who are federal officers, do not have the budget or time to implement this important transparency tool. The only reason is that they don't want to be transparent, period.
Stated it well. And of course, we have these cameras here, and thankfully they have them in Fairfax County. And importantly, there is overwhelming support by both police and members of the public for these cameras. This should not be controversial, and I think it is not controversial. It just needs to be done. That's why we were pleased to get it in the Policing Act that has passed the House, and we're certain at some point will pass the Senate. Ms. Gazar, given the tragic death of Bijan, can you please say to us what the park police officers or the park police refusal to implement such a program has continued to impact your family and you? Their refusal to implement. Remember, we were able to get a pilot program, and we don't pilot program.
No.
So if you could see some implementation of even a pilot program, what it would mean to you and your family?
It would mean the world. That would mean that the park police is ready and willing to change their policies and be more transparent. The fact that Chief Moynihan sat in that committee and refuse to even participate in the pilot program tells you everything there is to know. They don't want to be transparent.
Thank you so much, Representative Holmes Norton. And the chair is going to exercise a little discretion. And before we go back to the moderator side, I want to make sure that all the members have an opportunity to ask their questions. And so the chair is now going to recognize our colleague from Virginia, Ms. Wexton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel for joining us here today. And Mrs. Gaysar, thank you so much for sharing Bijan's story with us. I know it's very hard for you to keep going over this again and again and still have no closure. Now, for those of you who are not aware, I am a former prosecutor. I was a criminal defense attorney, so I appreciate the roles that everybody plays in keeping our community safe. And Mr. Ego, I present my hats off to you because PDS has a national reputation for being one of the finest public defenders agencies in the country. So I know that you have been there in the trenches fighting for people's rights. And Officer or Agent Cosme and Ranger Northrop, thank you guys so much for your service. I appreciate your remarks and what you've done for our country. But I think it's important that we remember that all those roles are important to keep our community safe, and transparency and accountability are necessary for the public to trust law enforcement. And a part of that, I would hope that you agree, Agent Cosme, is that officers act under clearly defined general orders when it comes to use of force and pursuit policies. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay. And would you agree that body cameras, when they're used properly and when they work well, they protect not only the civilians with whom officers interact, but also the officers themselves? Is that correct?
Yes, I do.
Right. Okay. Then that's been my experience in the jurisdictions where I've practiced, where we have dashboard cameras and things like that. Are you familiar with best practices in use of force and training policies?
Absolutely.
And have you had an opportunity to view Fairfax County's dashboard camera footage of Bijan's killing?
Yes, I have.
Okay. So in that footage, you observed that the officers got out of their cars with their guns drawn. Is that a best practice in a misdemeanor pursuit case?
Typically, it's not an initial best practice.
Okay, especially where they have no evidence that the person may be armed or threatening to them, right?
I don't want to comment specifically to Bijan's situation because I don't know the totality of the circumstances. I know, and I understand it's a tragic loss for his mother and his family, and I sympathize with that. But I don't know the totality of that. But in general, as a general rule, if it's a misdemeanor, that's not a best practice.
Okay, and is it generally a best practice to approach an automobile and slam your firearm into one of the windows?
I don't know the specifics of that case, but in general, no one should be slamming their firearm into anything. But I wasn't there at this specific incident. I don't want to comment specific to Bijan's incident because I'm not fully aware of the whole incident other than reviewing the video.
Right, no, I understand. And generally to kick an automobile is also not best practice, is my guess. Is that correct?
Typically not for a law enforcement officer. But I don't want to judge those officers. I was not there and I don't know the totality of the circumstances. But in general, that's not the rule.
But might body cameras help capture footage that might explain why an officer was doing these things?
Yes, it can, but it's not the final solution in itself, capturing the whole incident, because sometimes you have different angles. Like, for example, there have been some footage.
No, I'm not saying, I'm sorry, I'm just going to reclaim my time because I'm running out. Are officers trained to shoot at vehicles that are driving away from them?
Every department has different policies, and some policies they could be permitted to shoot at vehicles, and most policies they don't.
So most policies, most general orders prohibit driving or shooting at vehicles that are moving away from them. Is that correct?
Unless their life is in danger or someone else's life is in danger.
Very good. Now, going to the investigative process, is it typical to separate suspects and witnesses before they speak to law enforcement? Separate them from one another, witnesses to the same incident?
Yes, typically.
And the purpose of that is to make sure that they're not getting their stories straight or concocting a story. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that officers Vineyard and Amaya rode back to the station together after killing Bijan Gaisar?
I'm not aware of that.
Okay. Are you aware that the Park Police changed its use of force and its pursuit policy after Bijan's shooting?
I'm not aware of that, no.
Okay. Is it typical for internal investigations to await the results of criminal investigations, or can they be conducted concurrently, those internal investigations with the law enforcement agency?
Typically, what happens is the criminal part, if there's a criminal investigation in nature, that goes first, and then the internal disciplinary action goes afterwards. Historically, that's the way it works.
Thank you. I see that my time has expired, Mr. Chairman, so I'll yield back at this time. If there's a round, I'd like to ask more questions, but I understand.
So we will have subsequent rounds, and certainly there will be an opportunity. We really want to dig into this subject further. So the chair will now go back to my ranking member, Representative Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to say that there should be no excuses at all for not using or implementing the body-worn cameras. I think I want to make that clear. And actually, I begin my testimony saying that I do support the body-worn cameras, and actually many federal officers do use it. But I do understand as well that we need to provide the resources. So there's no option that the camera was not working or the footage was not available in the discovery process or securing the chain of evidence. So I just want to make that clear. And, I think that's the call for transparency. And actually, this is the hearing we're having for implementing this idea that I support again. So don't think that myself is against the issue. Actually, I deeply believe in this, and that's the reason I do not believe in defunding the police. How are you going to be implementing this kind of equipment and this kind of body-worn cameras if you are defunding the resources for actually acquiring this equipment and maintaining it? So, Mr. Cosman, I do have another question. Related to the footage used as evidence, your testimony raised an interesting point about educating jurors, prosecutors, and defense attorneys, limitations of body-worn cameras. In what context are you, can you provide along with how can we ensure accurate depiction of an incident if it's shared, the custody of the chain of evidence?
Well, what happens is sometimes you have prosecutors and public, and defense lawyers that are representing their clients, obviously, requesting footage on certain incidents. And that takes up time, and it's not just as easy as snapping your finger and going there and looking at thousands of hours of footage. And like for example, on a federal prosecution level, when you're talking to an assistant U.S. attorney trying to ascertain a specific footage, you try to get to the right specific footage you're looking for, because it's difficult to look at thousands of hours of footage, and who is going to do that? That's a manpower resource issue to the actual department that's formed by that department when you're doing federal prosecutions. And even on the local level, they have a set team of folks that I know from talking to my law enforcement partners on the state and local level, they have dedicated folks that handle those requests.
Another question then I need to make. You said in your testimony that a pilot program should be implemented prior to have a department-wide rollout of department cameras. Why do we need a pilot program in the Department of Interior if you got other federal officers in other departments that actually already got their cameras?
I think it's because it goes specific to that department, and I think it's important that the stakeholders in that department, which are the officers on the front lines that we represent, have the ability to report back to their command staff and say, okay, this is working, this is not, this is what's beneficial in terms of what kind of quality of camera hardware, the quality of the actual software, and all that data is compiled during that pilot program, and it's reported back to whoever's designated within their chain of command to report back to the overall department heads.
The Department of Interior actually got several bureaus. Which of them should be the one for a pilot program, if any?
Which of them should be doing it? We can start with the U.S. Park Police. I know that the Fish and Wildlife do have it, and there's other subcomponents that have it. But I think overall, if you do it across the board, the Department of Interior is a little bit smaller than other departments. Like where I retired from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which is a lot larger than Department of Interior. But depending on the cost, I think it could be implemented in a couple of subcomponents, across the board, and that way they could report back within 6 months of what's going on, with that data and what's the hardware that they purchased initially.
In my opinion, there's no money that can be changed for life. So in that sense, you need to invest whatever is needed to promote that transparency. But you need to allocate the funds for that. And we, as a committee, look forward to implementing this idea, which I support. We should look at the money as well. So there's no option. The agency is not compliant with Congress requirement. I do have several other questions, but my time is going to expire, so I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, and we'll have another round of questions, and it will go me, Representative Meyer, Holmes Norton, and then Representative Watson. But Mr. Cosby, over the Zoom here, I could tell you that you look just like Robert De Niro, which might provide a bit of your testimony a little bit more gravitas. And I just want to bring up a point, is that when I used to be a high school wrestler, my coach would tell me, if you're not getting better every day, you're getting worse. There's just no staying the same. You're getting better or you're getting worse. And I don't want to construe the sentiment of requiring improvements to our police force as I don't support cops. And would that be something that you agree with, that we should be striving towards perfection and to be getting better each and every day?
I think it's important to getting better every day. You have to support the individual. It's just like, and I'm also a wrestler, Chairman Cox. I wrestled at school, Chairman Cox, and I see where you're going. Exactly. I think it's the support of the whole issue, and I agree.
Well, no, thanks so much. And in fact, this year's funding, the bill passed by the House, Democrats supported increases in community-oriented policing programs in the House funding bill. So we just want to be clear here, is that body cameras and dashboard cameras are about better policing. In the HEROES Act, which is waiting on Republican acceptance, the majority of that is for heroes, for frontline responders, for our police officers, for firefighters, or first responders, and so on. And so I can tell you, there's broad spread support about the people that are keeping our community safe. But we need to be able to work together and to engender more trust. And it's our contention that we know that more accountability, more transparency would engender more trust. And love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's important, Chairman Cox, overall, that it would endear more trust. But it's also important that the law enforcement officers out there hear this from all elected officials, from any side of the spectrum, that they are supported when they are being attacked, like the ones that were attacked at the White House, when the riots were occurring and peaceful protests turned into riots and they were being attacked by bricks, caustic substances, and all these unknown liquids. That's important that we also support them in that area. And I am supportive of funding for the men and women that we represent. That's really important to the welfare of the men and women that do the job.
No, thank you so much. And I want to thank Mr. Gazar once again for being here. I mean, it takes unspeakable strength and a deep kindness to work so hard to turn a personal tragedy into advocacy and to make sure that something like this never happens again. And it's even more remarkable because of the families that are going to benefit from your efforts. And they'll likely not ever even know about your efforts. But thank you again. And as Mr. Gazar testified, there are very valuable lessons to be learned from specific confrontations with DOI law enforcement. And I want to ask about another one. On May 28th, 2018, two rangers from the Bureau of Land Management, the other bureau, approached the van that they believed to have been parked for nearly 2 weeks near BLM land. The rangers engaged with Eugene Bayless inside the van and noticed a holstered gun on the dashboard. The Rangers tried to secure the gun as they talked to him, but Bayless tried to pull the gun from his holster, and body camera footage showed that Bayless drew the gun, pointed it at the Rangers, and it showed that Bayless fired first, hitting a Ranger's ballistic vest. There was exchange of gunfire, leaving Bayless dead. And the evidence from the body camera was essential in determining the facts, and charges aren't going to be naturally pressed against the Rangers. Mr. Ago, what does an incident like this tell us about the utility of body-worn cameras, and what does it say about the need for good policies?
Thank you, Chairman Cox. It shows the importance of both body-worn cameras and rules and regulations that are followed strictly surrounding their use. And in particular, what it shows is that police officers that are acting in manners that are reasonable, that are consistent with protecting the public and protecting health and safety, will be exonerated in situations when they use necessary force as a result of an assault on them. And so body-worn cameras support the police officers in this situation.
And thank you so much. And very quickly, Mr. Northrup, the same question to you. What lessons for body camera usage at DOI does that incident with BLM Rangers hold for you?
Chairman Cox, I am not familiar with that particular incident, so I'm relying on what you just said, but I can only echo what Mr. Ago just said, which is that body-worn cameras are often instrumental in understanding what occurred and why it occurred, and often exonerates officers, not only in really serious situations like you just described, but sometimes with pretty routine complaints. I've been able to use footage from in-car camera systems to clear complaints about Rangers that frankly were just unfounded. So
well, great.
They absolutely serve the public interest.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to yield my time and now yield to my colleague from Virginia again, Representative Meyer.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. By the way, it's really fun to call you Chairman Cox, so you never come back. Mr. Ago, you talked about the importance of transparency, and I am very fortunate to represent Northern Virginia, where we have really high standards with Arlington, Fairfax, Falls Church, Alexandria. I just want to compare the transparency between Fairfax and Arlington and the Park Service, because in Fairfax County, we have the VASH video dash camera that gave us the insight into Bijan's death, not from the Park Police. Because of Arlington County, we have the audio communication at Lafayette Plaza that gave us insight into the infamous Bunker Bible photo shoot. We didn't get that from the Park Police. Alexander, where I live, more than 80 officers have completed the mental health first aid training. And Falls Church Police, I think they know everybody that lives in the city. But Mr. Ago, as I told then Acting Chief McLean the last time we met, the Park Police have lost the trust of the local communities. Everybody in Northern Virginia knows about Bijan and knows what happens. Too many people have been brave enough to watch the tragic video. Can you explain why transparency is so important as a tool for police agencies, and why having local trust is so important, and how they can even begin to rebuild that trust?
Thank you, Congressman Beyer, and I appreciate your remarks. Transparency is crucial and goes hand in hand with accountability for police. Trust is what creates good policing, because the community that police serve and protect, and that promote and whose officers promote the health and safety of the people in those communities, then begin to work hand in hand with the police to provide services that are necessary to make the to use Chairman Cox's phrase, to be better every day. If you're standing still, you're not getting better. And so, to use Chairman Cox's phrase, that's what accountability and transparency provide. And in particular with the Park Police, Congressman Beyer, this comes from the top. It comes from leadership that is welcoming of accountability and transparency. There is no real controversy I see in this subcommittee at all. Everybody's supporting body-worn cameras. Everybody's supporting proper rules and regulations. We would argue with some of the things that Mr. Cosme has suggested as proper rules and regulations. Having said that, though, the idea of proper rules and regulations are necessary. And so the problem with the U.S. Park Police, and it is tragically being experienced by the trauma to the Gaysar family, and in particular Mrs. Gaysar, is their approach and attitude towards transparency and accountability, as opposed to the Fairfax County, Virginia Police and their conduct in this particular case.
Yeah, we're very proud of the rest of our police, and still are so concerned. We know right away that Park Police had a policy about chases, which the officers ignored. They had a policy about use of force, which the officers ignored, and still no accountability. Mr. Cosme, we talked a lot about the funding issues. I just looked it up. We appropriated and enacted, Senate and the House and the President, $15 billion for the Department of Interior for the fiscal year that ends tomorrow, and another more than $9 billion in permanent authority for that doesn't have to be appropriated. $24 billion. You wrote very nicely about how the department has an unreliable and dangerous radio system. They have no idea what the status of their communication system is. What's going on as a business person when you have $24 billion and you can't do body cameras and you can't make your radios work?
That's the ongoing question, and I've sent letters even to this committee to do a general inquiry of the department to ask what's going on, because the men and women that I represent have reported back to me and my board of directors that they don't have adequate communication system. And I'm glad you're highlighting that, Congressman Byer. That's a real important issue besides the body-worn cameras, because let's face it, folks, you may have the ability to have a body-worn camera or an in-dash video of any footage, but if you don't have the ability to communicate, it could be a scenario where someone's visiting a park and has a heart attack. But if that officer cannot communicate for first aid, then we have a problem. And that's exactly right. I've yet to get some reasonable answers for that. That's an important issue that we need to address besides body-worn cameras.
Mr. Cosby, I know business and political leadership are not the same, but if it were my business or my department and I had something like that happen, I wouldn't wait 3 years to investigate it to figure out how to make it better. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. The chair will now recognize Representative Holmes Thornton from the district. Seeing she stepped out, so we'll now recognize our great colleague from Virginia once again, Representative Waxman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Cosme, I'd like to pick up where we left off. We were talking about those concurrent investigations, the criminal and internal investigation. You said generally the criminal goes first and then the internal.
Yes.
Now, during that time that internal investigation is pending, is it standard practice to, in a case where the officers were involved in a fatal shooting in the line of duty, is it standard practice to have those officers assigned to administrative duties such that they're not coming in contact with the public during that period of time?
It depends on each circumstance is different, but typically the standard practice is where they take administrative duties on pending the outcome of the matter.
So would it surprise you to hear that although it's been going on for almost 3 years, this investigation, whether it be criminal or internal investigation, after only 6 months, the officers Amaya and Vineyard were placed back on patrol duty? Would that be surprising to you?
That would surprise me, but every department has different policies internally, and I'm not specifically familiar with the policies of the U.S. Park Police.
Well, it is surprising because even though the Park Police were insisting publicly that these officers were on administrative duty, the Gaysar family learned through civil discovery that in fact, and this was reported in the Washington Post, that in fact they'd been back on patrol since April of 2018. And not only that, they'd been in a patrol car patrolling together at the same time, which is, of course, another issue with the whole getting their stories straight. So those are things that give me great concern. Mr. Ago, would that give you pause as well that these officers are working together on a daily basis on patrol?
Yes, Congresswoman, it certainly would for the reasons that you stated.
Okay, thank you. So the only reason that we have any information at all is because of the U.S. Park, not because of the Park Police's transparency or their disclosures in this case. In fact, they have stonewalled since day one, and they continue to stonewall almost 3 years later. The only reason that we have this information is because Chief Rossler from Fairfax County Police Department release the dash cam video. And when he did so, he cited transparency and the public interest in doing so. And as we've heard today, the Park Police, FBI, DOJ have all refused to release any information to the family, including the 911 tape the 911 recording that got this whole thing started. Kelly, how has this stonewalling affected your family? What impact has it had on you and your family?
It's been awful. It's been awful. Not only our son was killed by the Park Police and and them being federal officers, we have been lied to. They have stonewalled information, and they have even prohibited the FBI agents who did the investigation into Bijan's shooting to attend the grand jury, if ever there would be any, by Fairfax County prosecutors. I don't know how much of cover-up, lying, stonewalling could come out of Park Police or Department of Injustice, as I like to call it. And it has affected us dearly, because not only we've lost our son to an unbelievable non-reason, we have been lied to over and over again. Our trust in our government, our trust in our system is completely gone. We don't trust anyone, first. Second, please think about the youth of our country. Think about Bijan's friends. Think about all the 20-year-olds that have seen this over and over. And right now, my phone is blowing up with texts from Bijan's friends and our young family friends, and how disappointed they are. Why? Why can't we just say, this is what happened, this is the truth, we are sorry, what can we do? Let's make it right. Why can't we do that? Why have our government put our family through literally 3 years of hell? Instead of mourning, I have to be sitting here talking to this panel about a silly body camera. I mean, honestly, are we doing this right now today? This is how it's affected my family.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Kelly. I know it's been horrible for you, and I hope that you do find justice, and I hope that we take the steps to prioritize getting body cameras and data and storage to our federal law enforcement officers so that no other family has to go through this in the future. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. We are going to start the third round of questions, and it'll go myself, ranking member, then any other members that wish to address any other issues. And so at the end of July, this committee held a second hearing to examine the Park Police's attack on the peaceful protesters on Lafayette Square on June 1st. This is the infamous attack that immediately preceded President Trump's unwelcome, frankly, sacrilegious photo op with a borrowed Bible in front of St. John's Church. The acting chief of Park Police, Mr. Greg Monahan, testified at that hearing and largely defended the Park Police's action. They directly contradicted the testimony of National Guard whistleblower Major Adam DeMarco and others who had been present that day. And so there's no question that if the U.S. Park Police were wearing body cameras, it would have helped to clear up some of the conflicting reports of that day. But as we've discussed, the Park Police has not implemented body-worn cameras and has even prohibited officers from using them at times. And so, Mr. Ago, do you believe that the Park Police's resistance to body-worn cameras reflects a broader resistance to transparency and accountability within the force?
Yes, I do, Chairman Cox. Thank you for your question. And in addition to that, what I would note is that on the June incident, I listened to Mr. Cosby's testimony concerning difficulties in radio communications, but on the June 1st incident as well, the Park Police did not record their radio communications. again, providing us with less transparency than we should have as the American public.
Yeah, no, that's a great point as well. And in this subcommittee, we've looked at several workplace issues at Interior, including harassment and a systematic lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And what we've learned from examining these issues is that even when you have the best policies in place, that dysfunctional culture of a workplace simply will not change unless top leadership makes a sustained and sincere commitment to doing so. And Mr. Aga, in your written testimony, you mentioned some of the concerns about Acting Chief Police Monahan's history within the Park Police. And can you describe some of those concerns in more detail?
Yes, sir. About 20 years ago, Acting Chief Monahan, when he was a patrol officer, was found to have committed at least in a couple of cases, constitutional violations of people that he was arresting. Without accountability and transparency, the result was Mr. Monahan was not disciplined. In fact, rose to the level of chief of or supervisor in the Internal Affairs Division of the United States Park Police, and then subsequently rose to become acting chief. And that's when you see the problems with a lack of accountability, allowing someone who has the history and disciplinary problems that Acting Chief Monahan had to reach the top level of this very important police force. And it trickles down in terms of the attitudes and perspectives that the police force itself has, in other words, the U.S. Park Police has, towards accountability and transparency, which is tragically being experienced by the Gaysar family today.
No, thanks so much. And Mr. Northrop, spending a lifetime in career with the Park Service, I really appreciate your color and your input on really changing this dysfunctional culture of a workplace and what needs to be done, particularly at the U.S. Park Police and the Department of Interior.
Well, Chairman Cox, thank you for the question. I must tell you that my 36-year career with the National Park Service, working in various national parks, was absolutely wonderful. We certainly had cultural challenges, and there were many of us who were committed to continuous improvement, not just of our law enforcement programs, but the management and operation of parks as a whole. So I had a very positive experience working for the National Park Service. But I appreciate the concerns that have been raised by this committee. I can tell you that I do not have personal knowledge of some of the incidents that you are focusing on today, and the coalition thinks it would be inappropriate to comment on cases that are currently being both criminally and civilly investigated and adjudicated. But having said that, I feel a need to say that some of our members have expressed significant concern about the way in which these matters have been handled. And we are also interested in seeing all of the law enforcement departments in the Department of Interior become more open, more transparent. These are public agencies, and obviously with narrow exceptions, public agencies owe it to the public to explain what they've done and why they've done it. And the Coalition to Protect America's National Parks supports that effort.
No, thank you so much. And before I yield, I do want to make the point that, we had talked about the costs of body cameras and better telecommunications and communication systems. Let's be very clear. These are not costs. These are investments that have got real returns in terms of life saved, efficiencies, community, societal, and economic benefits. And with that, I will yield my time, and we will go to my great colleague and ranking member, Ms. Gonzalez-Colon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I cannot agree more. It is an investment. And I think we should do it properly, and we should ensure what happened to the family of Ms. Gaysar will never happen again. I think that one life is enough. And I think nobody should be exposed to this situation, either to have no transparency in the process for that justice man. But in that sense as well, this hearing, actually the title of this hearing is Police Cameras at the Department of Interior: Inconsistencies, Failures, and Consequences. So I'm just doing my questions in the line of what the hearings was all about. So I'm sorry if Ms. Gaysar understand that this should not be the issue, but that was the reason that the hearing was called. And I think, and I agree on the issue of investing in this. Having said that, I do have one last question. And I think not every time you got Republicans and Democrats in favor of one thing and having a common vision of investing in cameras and security, and I do support that. You were saying in your testimony regarding privacy. And sometimes, in my case, I'm a lawyer as well, privacy when there's a crime involved should not be the only concern for not bringing the people to justice. But I just want to be clear because I read your testimony and you said that privacy is one of the concerns regarding the creation of policies governing body-worn cameras. And you said that the ACLU also expressed concern about the privacy issues related to cameras. What privacy issues for the public or to the public for the officer? Mr. Cosme.
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure if it was for me or for Mr. Ago. I think for the public in general too, because you have HIPAA laws in some instances where you have these officers responding to a call where there's a medical issue involved, and the individuals that are being recorded may have a medical condition that you start questioning them about their medical condition, and this is being captured by the body camera, and this is what's been reporting back to me by the membership, that's an issue that we need to highlight and be careful with across the board, because these individuals need to be aware that they're being recorded, and how do you segregate that stuff and just extricate that from the actual body cam footage?
Not a new issue because you do have federal officers in law enforcement that now they do use body cameras, so that should not be different for the ones that may be implemented in the Department of Interior. Having said that, I want to say thank you, Mr. Cosme.
Thank you.
We're not on trial here. I really appreciate your experience and your views in terms of how law enforcement actually deal with this and how we can provide. And I truly understand that you can't defund the police and expect to have the resources and the equipment that is needed to grant transparency and protect our citizens. So in that sense, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to Ms. Gazar and the rest of the witness of today's panel, because I know it's not easy to talk about your son. It's nothing easy to talk about a crime that occurred that was never meant, should never happen. And I personally feel touched by your words. And I hope that this committee can do something to prevent this from happening. Having said that, I yield back my time. Thank you, Mr. Fox.
Thank you so much. The chair will now recognize Representative Byer from Virginia.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much, and thanks, TJ, for doing 3 rounds. And Ranking Member Gonzalez Colon, thank you for hanging in there with us. I much prefer your ranking member leadership to Mr. Louis. So if you would always come instead of Louis, that would be
And I promise
you're absolutely right that we don't want to defund the police, that all these things that we're talking about would not be possible if we're doing that. We probably don't need to buy as many rocket launchers or tanks or even heat rays. They may be better spent on radios and body cameras and training and good things like that. Mr. Ago, Robert McLean was the chief of the Park Police when Bijan Gaysar was murdered. I don't want to engage in ad hominem attacks, but structurally, does it make sense if you're the manager and you lose every game that you get promoted the next year, or if you're the head of a department that goes bankrupt that you then get promoted to run the whole country? What structural does it make sense after that disaster to move him into the chief law enforcement officer at Interior?
I can't speak to the structural failures on how he got promoted to that position, Congressman Byer. But clearly there are structural failures that someone that has under his watch overseen by all appearances, the unnecessary killing of a citizen, and then coupled with the cover-up that follows that, shows that he does not have the leadership skills that are necessary to oversee an even growing number of law enforcement officers. So I'm troubled by that. Without knowing anything further from the inside, it is troubling from the outside, and it speaks to the issue of transparency.
Yeah, thank you. I think it troubles many of us. And Ms. Gaysar, Bijan's license plate said Bijan. As the park police were chasing him at 45 miles an hour, chasing, I put in quotation marks, do you think the fact that his name was not Bill or Tom or Richard had an impact on what the police were thinking?
Yes, I do.
When he was in the hospital and they thought because you have a mild accent that you were Muslim, did that affect the way you think it affected the way they treated you while you were trying to visit him while he was on life support?
Yes.
Um,
In fact, I like to go a little further in that. When the two park police detectives knocked on our door on November 27, they showed us a snapshot of Bijan's one and only tattoo on his torso, which was written in Farsi, which is the Persian language. And as if, like, what? And I told them this is a love poem from Rumi, a great Persian poet. I don't know what they were looking for. I have no idea, but I found it very inappropriate. They had Bijan's license, they had his Bijan's license plate. I'm sure by then they knew who Bijan was. Showing me that particular item of Bijan's tattoo was so inappropriate. And I think the fact that they thought Bijan was Middle Eastern, and that had a lot to do with it. Absolutely.
do you think they thought it was the formula for an Iranian nuclear weapon?
That's actually funny in a very sad way, but yes.
Dark humor. I apologize.
No worries, please.
Mr. Northup, with the Bible incident and the clearing of the crowd, lots and lots of contested things over the use of heat ray and pellets and poison gas and things like that. If the park police had body cameras, wouldn't it have been a lot easier to reconcile what actually happened?
I believe it would, sir, yes.
And that's a sort of a final coda on the conversation for me. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Byer. And seeing that our other members have gone off to other activities, we do have just a bit of time. And so I'm going to take the last 5 minutes to allow our witnesses, each, there's 4 of us, and so it's about a minute 15 apiece to be able to provide any thoughts or final words themselves. And we'll go in terms of in alphabetical order. We'll start with Mr. Agel, and actually we'll finish up with Ms. Gaysar. Mrs. Gaysar.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. And I don't want to take too much time away from Mrs. Gaysar. I think that this is her moment to speak. I do want to emphasize, however, that the subcommittee and Congress, sort of larger the committee, and as well as Congress, has a real opportunity to be the leader in implementing body cameras across federal law enforcement writ large, not just by the forces that are overseen by the Department of the Interior. And so I would ask the subcommittee respectfully to take this opportunity and take advantage of this moment and become a leader in the federal government. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of the questions and all the time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cosby, and once again, thank you for being here and thank you for your efforts and your service to our country.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. This message is for Mrs. Gaysar. Like any shooting incident for law enforcement is a tragedy. And we know that we can't replace Bejan for you. And I know it's a tragic loss for you, and a mother's love is forever enduring. And we understand that, and we want you to hear that message. And I just want to also tell you that, as discussed during this hearing, body cameras is an important tool for law enforcement, but it's not an absolute solution in of itself. And it maybe would have shown different things what occurred to your son, but I just want to know that we feel your pain, and it's a tragic loss for you. We understand that, and I'm a father, and I just want to relay that to you. That's all I have to say. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me this opportunity.
Thank you. And Mr. Northrop?
Chairman Cox, thank you very much. We appreciate the hearing today, and I will also be very brief and just say that, again, we support very rigorous standards for law enforcement operations within the Department of Interior. We absolutely support the use of in-car and body systems, and we support law enforcement programs that are open and transparent and accountable to the public, and appreciate the committee's work to move us all in that direction.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Gaysar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I have so much to say, but I'm just going to make it as short as possible. First of all, the Park Police has failed to have a proper communication recording the night of my son's shooting. They claim that their communication was down. The same claim they had the day they gassed and beat the protesters in June 1st. Park Police Chief McLean and then later Park Police Chief Moynihan have done nothing, zero transparency or accountability or even communication with my family. The fact that I hear in testimony that $150 piece of gadget cannot be obtained by a federal police unit breaks my heart. Honestly, like I can't even think about that. Third of all, this has been sitting in my heart for a very long time. Last time you had a hearing with Police Chief Moynihan in a House committee, he had brought with himself a helmet of a Park Police officer and put it on the table when he was in the hearing. He had brought that helmet as a prop. Yet we have my son who is buried with 10 bullets shot at him by the Park Police, and we've never done anything as lowly as Chief Moynihan did in that hearing. Seriously, there has been so many things wrong with the Park Police, the way they represent themselves, the way they do things, but this has sat in my heart. I mean, when I see that helmet, and that is the case he wants to make, that his officers were beaten and abused at the protest, I don't know what I have to show. I'm not gonna stoop that low, but I just want to tell you, this is how disappointing the Park Police is from top down. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all the witnesses. I want to thank all the witnesses today for providing such important and unique insights into Interior's use or non-use, as the case may be, of police cameras. Ms. Gaysar, I want to give you special thanks for your courage in being here today. And I'm sure that your desire to do what we can to make sure that what happened in Bejan does not happen to anyone ever again. And it's disappointing, I can tell you, but not surprising that Interior didn't show up again today. They have forgotten that they're answerable to the legislative branch of government. We are the people's branch. Them not showing up is them not answering to the people. And I can certainly understand why they don't want to be here. I mean, it must be uncomfortable trying to defend this administration's actions that have been frequently, frankly, so unpopular, so anti-environment, so racist and deadly, and frankly, a lot of times so illegal. Maybe that's why the department's political leadership is now routinely squashing this committee's oversight efforts like this hearing. But this committee has a constitutionally backed responsibility to provide oversight to the Department of Interior on a suite of issues, including accountability and transparency in Interior's law enforcement. And so no matter how uncomfortable it is to answer these questions, the American people deserve answers. Mrs. Gaysar deserves answers. Mr. Gaysar deserves answers. Bijan's only sister deserves answers. Everyone that loved Bijan or was loved by him or was inspired by him or whose lives were improved by him deserves answers.
Thank you, sir.
Once again, I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we'll ask you to respond to these in writing. Under Committee Rule 3.0, members of the committee must submit witness questions within 3 business days following the hearing, and the hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for these responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.